Kudzayi Chakahwata, welcome to the Data Strategy Show. It's great to see you. How are you doing?
Oh, really well, thank you. It's so great to get the invite as well. So I really appreciate this.
That's all right. So it's a pleasure. Look, you are the first time on, the show.
Mm,
So it would be great if you could just give our listeners, our viewers, a little bit of a background about who you are.
yeah, absolutely. I'm Kudzayi Chakahwata, and I've been now in data and analysis for about 13 years and fell into it by accident. And I've had a quite varied and diverse set of roles across industries and sectors, including telecoms as a starting point, moving into, well, TV licensing, which was
Okay.
quite an
Yeah.
interesting run.
Yeah.
And then in gambling and gaming, and moving into retail, and also in travel, entertainment, the sort of music festival type of thing.
hmm
And then
hmm
now with Publicis, where I'm not strictly in data and analysis, but have broadened that scope because I felt like a bit of a one-trick pony, having spent over a decade of being very deep in analytics, whether it be hands-on myself or then move to leading quite large teams. So I'm here now to kind of see what else I can do. So it's a much broader role focused on wider marketing tech. Yes, the
hmm
data and the analysis is really important, but alongside kind of all tech, all audience type of work and marketing and media specifically.
Fantastic. Well, that
Mm,
sounds like a really broad set. Well, your background's very broad in terms of
yeah.
music festivals. That was pretty cool. What was that?
Yes.
Organizing them
Oh
or
God,
no?
no. No,
Analyzing
no.
it?
Well, if only it works that way. That was, in fact, a very brief flash in the pan because that was
Wow.
with the tech company Pollen that
Uh-huh.
went into administration very
Oh
shortly
dear.
after I joined.
Oh
But I
no.
did get
Oh
a very
dear.
brief insight into
Yeah,
the kind of very exciting lens that you could place towards doing a different type of analysis to what I've done before, but never
absolutely.
got to dive into that, unfortunately.
Oh, what a
So it'll
shame.
always be a
What a
mystery.
shame. What a shame. Anyway, look, Kudzai, you and I have spoken about this show and the premise of this show. And I think what I really want to understand is, look, you know, um, there's a lot of talk out there. There has been for many, many years around, a woman's place in the workplace, and specifically, how that has how it needs to be leveled up, and
Hmm.
and there needs to be parity, etc. I just wanted to get your view on, you've been in the industry, you've been, working in very diverse industries. What's your experience on where women are now, and are women in a much better place in the workplace, specifically from a data and analytics context? And of course, I know now you're in a very different place, but still, it would just be good to get, a real
Hmm.
insight into what your experiences are in that specific area.
Wow, just right into it.
Right, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's what I'm like. I mean, I got to cut to the chase. It's cut,
Love it.
yeah, sorry. Okay, I'll let you go.
Yeah. Well, I think it's gone the wrong way, is what I can almost start
Okay.
off saying. And
Yeah.
the reason I say that is because when I first started in terms of analysis, it
Mm,
wasn't an issue that I noticed, such as
mm,
being in the very, very slim minority. I mean, racially, I mean, it's always been interesting, but
right.
gender-wise, things were much more equal in terms of the teams I was in, the number of women in the teams versus the number of men. It always just seemed to, not really that much of a big deal. But then
Okay.
over the years, I would
Mm,
say, things have sort of turned and the trend has seemed to go the opposite direction that you would think. And whether that's simply due to where I've gone in terms of my career, or whether that is a broader trend entirely within data and analysis and in tech, I can't say for sure. But I recall in the last Women in Data event I attended, which was
hmm
not the last one, but I think the one prior, they did
Okay.
show some infographics saying that
hmm
numbers have actually gone down.
Oh,
And so I
wow.
do think my experience probably matches what's generally happening in that I'm now seeing less in teams than I am, less women in
Okay.
teams relative to men than I did back in the early naughty tens,
Oh,
which is,
wow. Interesting.
yeah. Mm.
So there's some stats that I recently got out, and we'll come back to that in a minute. I'd like to understand, but there's apparently women make up less than a third of the global workforce in technology related fields.
Mm.
And in the US, it says that 35% of employees in STEM are women. Just talking about that and going back to what you just mentioned about the initial view that you had and how there seemed to be no problems. What kind of context, what were you doing? And was it more social research or was it pure hardcore data and analytics? Or so I'm just trying to get an understanding of, what that was.
Well, funnily, in the most technical and the most, let's say, hardcore, I guess if you would like to say that, the most hardcore SAS programmers and just raw, very expert SQL coders, so Snowflake, SAS, and some Python too that I've ever encountered was during my time in Sainsbury's, which before I joined, they were known as the SAS House. And that team had like probably more women than men.
Oh, wow.
And these were some of the best analysts I've ever encountered in my entire career.
Incredible.
And their technical prowess was like nothing I've seen before. They were immense.
Fantastic.
And so thinking of that, I can't speak for the more qualitative side. I've never been on the qualitative side, and I thoroughly acknowledge the importance of it, as I love that type of insights, and I'm only kind of learning it now. But I've only experienced myself the harder, so to speak, as in you're in hard data, not necessarily that it is a harder field, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
So no, I haven't seen that versus kind of more qual versus quant, that split. It's just, it's kind of odd. It turns to be very company driven as well. And also within companies, you get some teams generally where there tends to be more weighting between the genders, more women than men. And we've got some of our teams who are in the Baltics who are have very prominent, very talented women in them as well. So I think it's a symptom of how people recruit. And I think it's very easy to fall into the circles of individuals, instead of casting the net very wide. And I do think part of it is I can lean on blaming, if I may, blaming recruitment processes that are not casting the net, but are leaning on who do we already know.
Okay. And you mentioned something earlier about ethnicity.
We're going there.
I had to bring it up because you talked about that. So it, obviously from my background, I understand that, and I think that's the affinity I have when somebody talks about discrimination or anything like that in the workplace. But as a woman, and then having this extra sort of added element in terms of ethnicity, is there a big kind of divide because of that? Are you more marginalized because of that, or are we finally seeing a status quo in because we've had a lot of DEI stuff and sort of strategies around that? What's your experience in that?
Wow, where to begin? I would say not the most popular of opinions, but I wouldn't say in any way, shape or form that a lot of so-called DEI, and I'm not sure if the UK even use that term we're just stealing it from the US.
Probably.
I can't really say that there has been a felt direct measurable benefit to it. And I'm speaking for myself in terms of that. But of course, it's very hard to judge, isn't it? Because you can't split yourself in two and have a control group with or without it. But I, for one, wouldn't say that those initiatives are sufficient to almost override the natural kind of biases that everybody has, no matter what we look like. And it's not only the case that biases exist in certain groups of people, they're in all of us. And and you can't out legislate it, you can't out policy it, and it's just going to be there. Having said that, it's not something I've focused on too deeply throughout my career, because the extent of the challenges that I've had to face in terms of the actual professional challenges, as actual problems to solve, business challenges to solve. They've taken more of my bandwidth than any kind of time or strength or mental space I've had to focus too deeply on perhaps what people may be thinking of the fact that I'm in a team.
Yes.
Because it's just been like, when you're sitting in front of code, you're just,
yes.
I don't have time to think about
you
this
don't
sort
have
of
time
stuff.
to think about it. And that's interesting, because it's very similar for me. You know, someone will ask me, you know, I'm sure you've experienced, you know, some form of workplace bias or whatever, and I've sort of said, I just don't have time for that. You know, I just get on with stuff, you know, and maybe there was, but it didn't, you know, affect me. It didn't kind of come to the fore. So it's interesting you said that. Just going back to the DEI thing for a second. In terms of that whole, I mean, you know, I came out of corporate probably when the whole DEI thing, or whatever we call it here, I don't know what we call it, started to, you know, become a popular narrative. What would you say is a better way, or is there are there processes that should be in place which will equalize or give merit to people for, you know, who they are, rather than, you know, what their experiences are? So what do you think should be in place instead of DEI? You know, I know, again, it's a big policy question, right? And I'm sure we've all got our, you know, our own thoughts, but it's just interesting to kind of understand where you think improvements can be made.
Yeah, firstly,
and I know you're not an HR individual, so
I am
get
definitely
that.
not
I
in
know
any
that,
way.
you know, so
And
I think
I'm
it's just, you know,
and I'm also not the most politically correct person either.
and nor am I, so don't worry, you know.
So I'm trying to almost filter the words a little bit.
I'm you know, it doesn't matter. I think this is the reason for this conversation. It's better to, you know, to have an expressive view rather than it be filtered, because you know, we don't get the true meaning of things then. We don't get the true understanding of things.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, first of all, I think, and not that I'm an expert, but I would like to almost invite all of us to maybe read up on exactly what DEI is and where it is. And I believe, and I could be wrong, that it is very much, well, mostly in America.
Right.
And whereas in the UK, I don't believe we necessarily have initiatives like that, but we have the Equality Act.
Yes.
But we do use the word, the terminology, the three letters, but I don't believe that they're applied in the same way in the UK as they are in America. Like, I believe things like quotas are more common in the US, whereas they're frowned upon here. That's not the way things necessarily happen. Again, correct me, this could be completely wrong. And I also believe things like putting people in positions or forcing people through a process because of certain attributes doesn't happen necessarily in the UK. I can't speak for if it is happening at all elsewhere, but there's a lot of panic and perhaps misinformation that it is. And I don't see why that would be a logical way to hire at all. Because
I don't
why not? Why do that? And because it just makes no sense to me. And I know there was a course I went on in Sainsbury's that was a bit of an extension of this type of topic, saying that that just doesn't happen. Someone is not going to put someone in a role simply because of a protected characteristic. Then no one's going to like bypass their biases in order to make that happen. Even though there is a lot of theatre in terms of what I think should be better. This is my real bugbear, is there are a lot of companies who shout very loudly and have a lot of posters and show a face of support. Whereas in fact, when you're in their environment, they in no way, shape or form make any sort of, let's say, acknowledgement for you and what the experience could be for you when you're in. So there's a lot of emphasis on the numbers. And I think that's the wrong focus. It needs to be on what actually the work environment is like when you have people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And that could mean anything in terms of background, not just racially, and how you effectively work together. I think that's where the ball is truly dropped. Too much theatre, too much focus on the numbers, not enough focus on how we actually make a culture work really, really well.
And you know, it's a really great point, because as soon as you started saying that, multiculturalism came up in my head. You know, and and that's been bandied around a lot. We're a multicultural society, and yet, I think it was a couple of years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, that people were up in arms because they said we're not really a multicultural society, and have we as a society gone too far in terms of multiculturalism or inclusivity? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing per se, but I'm just trying to understand, is it the right term? You use culture, which is great, because I think that is the piece where every organization's got their own culture, and framing that culture in a way with people, and bringing them into a collaborative working space, I think is what should be, the sort of positive views of working. And then you've got the different nuances that people bring, their different backgrounds, their different experiences, and absolutely their different ethnicities, or whatever cultures they come from, and how does that permeate into that sort of working dynamic. And I think and maybe, as you said earlier, when you sit in front of code, who cares about all of the other stuff, because you need to get that piece of code sorted. But it is having that multicultural value system something that would benefit, or do we think that it's actually it's not giving us the gains that we really need as people sitting in very blended, diverse companies and organization structures?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say I don't think multiculturalism has gone too far in the UK. And I think anyone who says that outright probably needs to just look at the statistics in terms of the actual numbers of people who are in the UK, and even who are coming in through means that they find themselves abhorrent, and to also understand the root causes of why, and to think more critically than to just use awful terms like invaded. And it's, which I find quite funny, actually, considering I'm partly Zimbabwean, how the British feel they're being invaded, and considering the countries where those individuals are taking extreme risks to come onto the shores of Dover, and what exactly the role the UK played in terms of the stability or the instability and the development or the lack of developments in those places. So I think that the utter hypocrisy is quite disgusting. But at the same time, I can understand the disgruntlement, but the blame is being pushed towards the wrong group of people.
I agree. Yeah, I agree on that.
People need to stop and to really think about what is happening here. And I can also add one last layer, and I'll stop talking about this because I know that's not the question you asked.
That's fine.
That the layer about who to really criticize and who to critique here. People need to think more cleverly, as the whole system under that's in place to deal with the situation, the fallouts, is utterly crap. And that's where people need to pay attention to, not the individuals who are taking these insane risks. But I'll get off my high horse and say, I think I can understand the disgruntlement with the word and the concept of multiculturalism, because I think the theatre behind it has been very loud, but it's an illusion. In that there have been very loud voices who have been speaking about showing, let's say, whether it's a fair amount of empathy or kind of just being a little bit patronizing, and whereas they're not actually showing the degree of empathy that they're saying that people generally should show towards certain groups of people. It's all theatre. So people have gained a serious degree of disgruntlement over a sentiment that is not real, that is not actually impacting anybody positively who doesn't look like them. It's all theatre, and they're freaking out and feeling threatened and feeling panicked because there's been a lot of attention paid in voice, but the real impact hasn't been seen or hasn't been felt. And so I can understand.
It's completely
misplaced.
Not true. It's completely misplaced. I agree with you. I agree with you in that. Great conversation. I love this. Let's just move into I really do. Yeah. Let's just move into leadership, right?
Yay.
As a woman, do you, and I'm cognizant of this because I kind of, maybe I'm just looking at it from my perspective as a male. I walk into a situation where leadership is leadership. I'm I'm in a position where I've got a team, and I sometimes feel like, well, this was in the days of corporate. Now I run my own company, so it's very different. Um, it just felt sort of natural. Is there an unnatural feeling, and in a leadership position for a woman, and do you have to change your style, to reflect some kind of bias or feeling that you've got in that, in that cultural arena? Yeah, it's something that I'd really like to explore.
That is a really interesting point that you mentioned, and I want to make sure I heard it correctly. That you said to you, leadership felt natural. Is that right?
Yeah, I can't kind of explain it. I mean, yes, it felt natural, but I never had to change my way of being. And I'm just wondering, and maybe that's because of the, in the leadership, in the sort of, in that, when you get up to a certain level, in an organization, and maybe you see more of the people that, are male, it feels more natural. I don't know. Maybe, there's a lot of stuff that, I'm thinking about now as we're talking about it. And I'm just wondering, as a woman who goes into that position where she doesn't really see, others that are like her, but very male dominated, how much of the leadership style needs to change, or can you be yourself? Maybe I'm not asking the question right, but yeah, is there a play into that, and how much do you have to really be cognizant of what you're saying, what you're doing, how you're being perceived? And I think those are the types of things that that I'd like to understand. As a woman, is there something that you really have to change about the way that you are working, in that context?
So it's a very interesting and very profound question, actually. And I would I'll try and answer the question outright first and then ramble.
That's fine.
I'd say no. I don't see the benefit of changing or changing how I am in this environment specifically, where to just briefly go into the org of the team I'm in, to just so that everyone and we can all relate to it, in terms of the level that that we're in terms of, there's all job titles are a mess right now, so they mean nothing, don't they? In terms of being sort of like a technology, audiences, solutions, and kind of that huge pot of stuff at lead level. Let's say within my team specifically, in terms of that kind of tech, a role that's in that tech front, I'm the only woman in it, in terms of that level. But they are obviously at a slightly more junior level as well. And to top it all up, generally there's a race overlay too. There's that only kind of like the only black woman in that sense as well. So there's like a double whammy. So yes, I lean back and to say I do not see the value in changing the way that I would operate, but I would also say it another way, which is mathematically different, in that there is more value in not changing, trying to change what you say or what you do, because it's often the perspective, forgotten how to speak today, perspective that would come along with having slightly different lived experiences is often what a team would need in these situations. And you're almost doing the team and yourself disservice by trying to mold yourself in and to fit, whereas you can have quite a unique role, a much more value adding role, by sort of, it's not about picking on what's not working, but bringing something different in and saying, whether it's saying things differently, maybe I don't mean that exactly as I mean it, doing things differently and having a totally different approach is the value. So that's how I see it.
And I agree, and that's great to hear. Because I've had conversations with others where generally a number of other women have told me I do sometimes have to change the way I am, and I'm often kind of, oh wow, that's kind of interesting, and so just sort of leaning into that and understanding where and when you might have to, and it's great to hear that you don't, because I think that's a level of
well. Gender-wise, I don't.
Well,
but there is. I'm very aware there is code switching, and I do that. I definitely do that.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
And how does that manifest itself? What sort of leads to that?
I leave a lot of the kind of slang
Right.
out of the workplace, or
Okay.
the way in which I'll talk to my cousins or family
Sure.
members.
Naturally.
That does
No,
not come
that
into
wouldn't.
the
Yeah,
workplace.
Yes.
And if, for example, people were to be a fly on the wall when I'm talking
Yes.
to cousins, they'll just be like, "Who is that?
Who is that person?"
Yeah. So I leave that.
But that's a very cultural context as well, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
a familial, cultural. Those are different things that we all have inside out of ourselves, no doubt, which probably wouldn't come out. Well, I don't know. Maybe there are some people that would come out in.
Oh, it slips out
Yeah,
sometimes.
it does. It does.
If someone shocks me in a meeting, I may come
Yes.
out with a "ra" or something like that. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Oops.
Oops, fantastic. But you probably mask it quite well and, lead into something else.
For the most part.
Yeah. So, that's interesting for me that from that perspective, and therefore, for women now coming up in, for those people at university or in school, and STEM has been a big thing for a long time, and now in my daughter's school they're calling it STEAM because they put art inside it. Yeah.
What have they done?
Science, technology, engineering, art, and maths. Yeah. So they've kind of put A in there, which is quite interesting. I like it. Sounds good.
That is interesting because it all is very linked to art anyway.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So if you were giving advice to, I don't think there's going to be, young kids listening to this, but those who are, outside.
If you are, hats off to you. Well done.
Well, that would be quite amazing if I had that reach. But those who are going into university now, or those who are thinking about where they end up in their career, and just navigating the corridors of power, and trying to work out as a woman where, how they sort of, get into their groove, so to speak. And, what kind of things would you know, given your experience, given your background, given the amount of time that you spent in the corporate world, what would be your top 3 things that you would, sort of say, these are the things as a woman to watch out for? These are the things that really, you need to make sure that you cover off. Are there 3 things, or?
So is it for, let's say, young women who want to enter STEM or STEAM, or are thinking about it?
Yeah, or any kind of data and analytics, or whatever that might be, seeing as that's where you've come from. Whether that be in data engineering, or whether they want to be a data scientist, or whether they want to be a data analyst. What would you sort of offer those wise words for them?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is almost don't. I'm going to say, don't listen to me, is what I'm going to say. I was going to say,
don't listen to me.
No, not me, but this is going to sound so contradictory, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that it's almost a case of not taking to heart too much what people are saying about it.
Right.
As in, there is a lot of unflattering stuff being said about the experiences of women in STEM, or those who are in the global majority in STEM. And there's a lot of negative stuff being said. And I think it's very sensationalized, not to say that there are people having bad experiences, but I don't think to a degree that STEM is wildly over-indexed in causing difficulty, unless you're pale male, than any other industry. That's my political incorrectness coming out. There we go.
I've never heard that, pale male.
Yes.
Well, look,
bias exists everywhere. And I don't think there's a particular concentration of it within that I've experienced in STEM or STEAM. What I would say, so that's my first part, is come into it and make your own assessment, make your own judgments. as I have found the type of people you work with generally have more are very logical.
Right.
And
Yes.
it's almost such that their brains are so occupied, as I mentioned, we're so
Yes.
occupied with the problems that we have to solve that we don't have time to notice that the person sitting
Yes.
next to us is a woman. We don't have
Yes.
time to notice that they're from Pakistan. We don't have time
Yes.
to notice their religion or anything. We're just sitting there. We want to solve this problem because we have a senior leader breathing down our necks as to why sales are down in the last month. That is more the philosophy that I've encountered in STEAM than anything else. So form your own judgments and don't be put off by what you hear, because generally the way people talk is, and the way news is right now, is very illogical. And the second thing I'd say is go into it because you're really curious and because you love the idea of it. Don't chase money.
Yes.
Even though there are very high rewards for it, don't go into it for the financial reasons, because it will pull you apart. The extent of the challenges you have to face and the resilience you need is like, I'm not going to say like no other, that's me lying, I'm biased here, but it's very challenging. It is very, very challenging. And so go into it because you really want to, not because you think it's a good way to make money, which it is. But you've got to really love it.
But you've got to love it. You've got to have passion for it.
Oh, you absolutely do. And you've got to be genuinely interested in solving these problems, because then that'll come through, and that's what gets you that influence.
Yep.
And what did I say? I've written another note, but I can't read it now.
Oh.
Yeah, and yes, I think that's what I said. Two things really. I don't have three.
Okay.
I have those
All
main
right,
two.
that's fine.
Form your own impression and go into it for genuine reasons.
Yeah. Wonderful. Really good. There's one thing that I just wanted to come back to. You mentioned earlier that when you started out, there was a better sort of equilibrium between male and female, specifically in the teams you were in. And then suddenly, as you got further, there are less of that, that sort of equal setting in teams. So that obviously means to me that over the years, there's a lot of retention challenges within, within industry. And maybe I might be wrong in terms of data and analytics teams, or but from your experience, and some of the notes that I've read, I think it's more than half of women in tech leave the industry by the midpoint of their careers. And that's quite interesting for me, and maybe that's because of, family things, and maybe that's, the dependency on, children, and, that then, the sort of, I don't know, the sort of motherly instincts kicking. I have no idea, right? I don't know. With these things, and as you've seen, things go actually from where they were good to not so good now. What would you say that companies need to do in order to retain women in a far what do you think they need to do to better retain women in the workforce, and to have that level of parity, because as you said, code is code. Doesn't matter who's looking at it. If they understand it and they can improve it, that's great. But what would you say to if you had an organization and you ran a multi-million pound, multi-global, whatever, multinational organization, what would you do to better that retention and to decrease some of those issues that are out there?
Well, this is very interesting, because I would almost critique what I said at the beginning to start with saying that I can't isolate necessarily my experiences, whether it's due to simply you move up the ranks and become more senior. That's a natural, not natural, but it tends to be how things happen, like the attrition in all workplaces, regardless, is probably one element of what I'm experiencing and seeing. Whereas I think it's probably the case that in data and analytics entry level, when you start, you're that associate analyst, mid-banded analyst. I think the numbers are probably still great. I mean, people who could let me know if I'm wrong here. And however, I'm sort of basing my point of view on that there has been an above normal than expected attrition based on some of the infographics I saw women in
Right.
data in
Right.
data and
Yes.
tech in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's many factors that could be leading into that. So in terms of what I think, what companies need to do, I don't think it's necessarily something that companies themselves can solve. I think we've got a very big general overarching cultural,
Yeah.
I won't say issue, but the framework of culture is what leads this, in that it's still accepted or known or thought through that women are the default parent. And I think
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I love even though it's not a book that necessarily applies to me, but I read a lot of stuff like this because it feeds into everything. I think it's Eve Rodsky who wrote the book Fair Play, which is a very
Okay. No, I
interesting
don't know
book
that.
that
Yeah.
talks about how
I'll write
women
that
are,
down.
yeah, placed as the default parent, and
Right.
talks about division of labor inside the home being unbalanced, being a huge factor, and how we're still like this in 2025. And she proposes a system to kind of equalize that, which takes place conversation by conversation and relationship by relationship, if you're assuming a heterosexual relationship in this case. But these problems prevail also in in between lesbians, between gay men, between everybody, between every combination of individual you can have. These problems still arise. It's not necessarily just men, women. So anyway, and I learned that also by listening into Esther Perel's podcast of Where Should We Begin, where she's literally a psychotherapist and has people on her couch, and these issues prevail regardless of the person who's sitting, or sexuality, anything. So gender roles are so insidious that it doesn't need man and woman to have them infect a relationship or situation. So that's something I learned. Anyway, I'm rambling. So I don't think, in summary,
you never think, I never think that way. You never think, because we're so attuned to the heterosexual view that you never actually think that, now you say it's so obvious, but one never kind of, realizes that it does have the same impact or the same bearing on those other types of relationships, which makes complete sense, so no, great, I love it,
which makes me, which is quite concerning, but it's quite reassuring in a way, because it makes you remove it's so weird, it makes you remove gender from gender roles as a problem. It's a phenomena that needs to be addressed in its own right.
It's a natural phenomenon in that way.
Or unnatural, or forced, or culturally forced to create a power dynamic, if the one wants to see it that way. Well, I'm not saying I know all the answers, but one may think of it, or one may say it's natural. I'm not arguing either way. It's just I like to have the challenge and to open the discussion, and not for people to sit in one camp very firmly. But I don't think it's something companies can necessarily solve from the top. But if I were a CEO or had a huge multinational organization, I would completely love to redesign the way in which people work, such that this doesn't become an issue. As I think the perception is that the workplace was very much designed around the principle that there is going to be someone else in the home taking care of everything, just the structure of it. Whereas I would redesign it. I would love to shift the sort of operating model of the workplace. And I know some companies are doing this slightly already, but I'd like to focus on autonomy, focus more on autonomy, and results being the only sort of judgment factor. So in other words, I mean, to test a situation, of course, it's always a test to see, I'm not fussy with you about where you work. I don't necessarily care about your hours necessarily. I'm concerning myself with your results. And whenever you get it done, that's fine. But of course, there needs to be some degree of minimal kind of communication and cohesion based on where people are, time zones, and where people can actually meet. And that needs to be a set agreement. But in terms of that, I would try and shift away from, you arrive at 9, you leave at 5:30 or 6, whatever it may be. You must be at this place at this time. And if someone is ill at home, or you're in it, that causes upheaval, and that's crazy. Just to try and put things in place, or to remove barriers, to make it easy for everybody, no matter what your life situations or circumstances may be, and to test how that works. And I know there's probably some camps saying, well, people will take the piss, but I mean, you shouldn't be necessarily hiring people or keeping people on that you don't trust.
Exactly. No, that's a really good idea. I like that, because it's results, it's value based, it's outcome based, and therefore it's not based on the individual. It's based on it's based on whether they deliver. So
Yes.
it doesn't matter if they're a male or a female.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
and you get rid of that sort of, you know, that marker, you know, that criteria. So I like that. I
Yeah.
like that way of thinking. And you know, I talk about value a lot. So I you know, coming from what
Oh,
I
yes.
do, yeah. And I think I agree with you. If the workplace was more results and value driven, that may, you know, rebalance a lot of the way that, you know, people work, because they're, you know, unless you're in the hardcore financial industries and you're a trader, and then you're not a trader. But I guess that's, you know, very different. And how would you, you know, then deal with that? And maybe there's different targets, or there's different outcomes and results that the
Yeah.
other person will need to get. So yeah, no, it's really interesting. I'm interested to explore that more. However, we've run out of time.
We have, haven't we?
Yes,
Oh,
we have.
that
Yeah,
went by so quickly.
it did. But that was fascinating. I loved our conversation.
So did I.
We've gone through a lot of different areas. I feel like you know, we've only touched you know, on the surface of a few of them. So, you know, thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
really enjoyed it, and thank you for your honest responses, because I think that's also needed. You know, in a time where political correctness is everywhere, and we just need to, you know, get back to reality, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Talking to each other like humans,
Yeah,
not as groups.
exactly. That's right. Yeah. So thank you for that. That's been really refreshing today.
Oh, and also thank you. And I'll continue to read your materials, as I think I align on a lot of what you say in terms of
Well,
value
thank
into
you.
organizations. And I
Yeah,
think that's a far more logical approach, as we have become quite heavily leaning towards showing off tech.
correct. You're absolutely right.
Mm.
And on that note, I wish you the best for the rest of the day, and enjoy the sun in London, as you
I
probably
am, and I
are.
will.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Yeah. Just stop it.